Hey everybody, how you doing? This is Jim Grisanzio from the Oracle Groundbreakers team, and I'm here with Avi Miller from Australia. Avi is one of the product managers for Linux and open source at Oracle. And Avi, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me. I am glad to be here. I'm glad to see someone.
Well, a couple of things. First of all, that's really great because you're down there in Melbourne, Australia, and you guys have been in the news lately.
We have.
Yeah.
We've got also 6 more weeks of lockdown to go through, so you're a sight for sore eyes. I get to see a person.
Excellent. But also, and hopefully more importantly, you're my first podcast guest, so I'm very honored.
Thank you for having me. I'm very pleased to be here.
Cool. And so this is just a quick preview for our Twitter friends out there, but we're going to be having a conversation here, and I'll be releasing this podcast on the Oracle Groundbreakers, podcast platform in a couple of weeks. So I'll announce everything on Twitter, of course, because everything's on Twitter. Yeah. So I want to talk about Linux and open source. Can we do that?
Of course. We've got so much stuff going on at the moment. We've got the world's first autonomous Linux. We've got new kernels. We've got our shift to GitHub, and Oracle's gone nuts on GitHub. We've got Graal VM, and speaking about Twitter, what that's done for their performance. So there's so much happening. Not to mention we've got things like developer conferences all going online now. Our conference is going online. There's no, I'm not coming to San Francisco anymore because there's no open world. Well, it would have been Vegas this year, but I'm not going to Vegas because there's no open world. So what does the world look like with no conferences? No swag. I don't get any swag.
And absolutely indeed. Okay, so what about that car in the background there?
This is my swag. That is a Lego, that one is a Lego Bugatti Chiron. I don't know how you pronounce it. Over there is a Lego Super Nintendo and the Apollo 11 lunar module.
Yep. Yeah.
The thing at the bottom here is a modular village. So each building you build separately. It's got a diner that side, and it's got a garage, and it's got a detective's office, and it's got a pool table, and all sorts of things. So that I've been building for over, a couple of years now. Collecting and building.
Okay, Avi, we're going to talk about some hacking, some Legos, and a bunch of open source. Thanks a lot, man. Talk to you soon. Hey, Avi, how you doing? How's it going down there?
It's good. It is a bright, sunny day for a change here in Melbourne. I don't get to go outside much, but but it's good. I'm enjoying it. It's nice to be in spring.
You say it's bright sunny, and that's not unusual. Our impression of Melbourne is it's always sunny down there.
No, Sydney is always sunny. Melbourne is awful. Melbourne has very wild weather. So we get very cold in winter. We get very hot in summer. Like, unfortunately, California at the moment, we burst into flames at a moment's notice too, if you like. So keeps you on your toes. Our weather, our animals, and our plants all keep you on your toes here in Australia.
Well, Avi, I definitely wanted to have you on here. You are my first guest on the podcast, Oracle Groundbreakers Podcast, that my colleague Javed Mohammed and I are taking over from Bob Rupert, who started this thing years ago. And I'm particularly interested in Linux and open source development, and just really development in general. It doesn't even have to be open source. I'm particularly interested in how engineers solve really hard technical problems, the thinking process, the development process, the testing process, all these things. And the reason I'm interested in this, because I used to be on the Open Solaris project, and I was around kernel developers for a long time, and they just impressed me as not only smart, obviously, but just their thinking process, how they built things, right? And so that's what I want to talk about. So
cool. We've been talking about this at various conferences over the years as well, and you go back to one of our open world interviews. So yeah.
Exactly. So we've had a few conversations before, and you always describe yourself as the open source guy, right? So
I am When I joined Oracle 10 years ago, I joined Oracle from a tiny little open source company that I knew everybody at. I joined Oracle, and there's 100,000 people, and I stayed at Oracle because I could talk to the kernel developers. I could talk to our vice presidents of Linux engineering. I could go to our testing people, and I could. The exchange of information in Oracle has always been very open, and that's what's kept me here for a decade, because I can go and knock on someone's door and say, what is this? And it's great.
So let's start off with who you are and what you do. Right?
Okay. The 5-minute brief one. I'm Avi Miller. I am one of the Oracle Linux product managers, which outbound product managers, which means I talk about and evangelize Oracle Linux and all of the sort of associated products and components to Oracle Linux. So it's things like Ksplice and dtrace and our Unbreakable Enterprise Kernel, Spacewalk, our cloud native environment, our OS management service now on OCI, and Autonomous Linux, which is our world first Autonomous Linux. We have now Oracle Linux KVM and Oracle Linux Virtualization Manager. We've got VirtualBox. We've got lots of things in our bag of tricks, and I generally talk about as much of it as I can. So, and the other thing that I try to do is get more of Oracle interested in what we do. I mean, we are the core of Oracle, but a lot of people forget that we're here because we get given away for free, which is somewhat unique with Oracle products generally. So it's nice to bring attention to us now.
So you mentioned Autonomous Linux in there. Back last year, this was last fall in September, and I was talking to Wim. We were doing an interview with Wim, and unfortunately, I had the interview scheduled before Larry announced Autonomous Linux. So he was sort of hinting at it. And I said, "What?" Because I didn't know about it. I didn't know anything about it. And I said, "He's hinting at something. What are you talking about here?" So we're many, many months later. And so tell me, what is Autonomous Linux?
Autonomous Linux, it grows from what we achieved with Autonomous Database, where we take care of the mundane administrivia of managing your instance, the stuff that you have to do because it's your job, but you don't really want to do. It's not exciting. It's things like patching. It's things like security alerting. It's things like tuning. The goal with Autonomous Linux is that all of your sort of rote, mundane sysadmin tasks should be taken care of by the autonomous system. And because we've got so much experience and history with our machine learning and our AI and our sort of all that kind of stuff from Autonomous Database, we're now pointing that view on Linux and pointing it at I/O patterns that we have in our database, pointing it at memory patterns that we have in our middleware service, pointing it at network patterns that we have on our edge nodes. One of the amazing things by being both a cloud vendor and a software vendor is that we can be our own sort of guinea pigs and platform. We can take all of the analytics that we get out of Oracle Cloud and pour it into a big data machine and go, now tune the systems, and out comes all sorts of things from the big brain in our data sciences machines, which is very cool.
So this just seems like a natural evolution here.
And from Larry's keynote last year, he wants everything autonomous. The Oracle Cloud, the Gen 2 Cloud autonomy was the big thing. So it started with Autonomous Database. We've now got Autonomous Linux. We'll have more autonomous products coming down the track. And the idea is that you focus on your business needs and you let us do, or let the machines do, if you like, the day-to-day stuff. And we'll make stuff faster for you. We'll make stuff more secure for you. We'll make stuff more up to date for you. That kind of stuff we'll just take care of. And we guarantee all the compatibility, and we do all the testing and stuff like that as well. So it's your decision making around this should be, I'll just put my stuff and the rest will get handled by the autonomous system, like the database does. So
interesting. So everyone knows that Oracle is a big Linux vendor, but I don't think everybody is as aware of just how much activity that Oracle engineers have around the development within the community, within the Linux community.
Sure. We've been kernel developers since before we had a distribution. Oracle Database was the first commercial database available for Linux in 1997, but give me a year or two either side of that one. But we were the first commercial database on Linux before there even was, Red Hat and stuff like that. We started working on the kernel back then. We started contributing the stuff that we needed for our database, the stuff that we needed for other products as we acquired them. Along the way, we released distribution and we started developing for that. But the nature of kernel work is that the stuff that benefits us benefits more than us. We have some, sort of fundamental focus areas, if you like, from Oracle's perspective. It's performance, it's security, and it's scale. I often joke that nothing stresses a system quite like an Oracle database. Like nothing grows quite like an Oracle database. Nothing. When I was in open source and then sort of like in the small stuff, and then I came across to Oracle a couple of years later, people were talking about their huge MySQL databases. This was before we bought Sun. And they're going, they're a couple of terabytes. And I'm going, come to me when they're petabytes, and then we'll talk. A terabyte database for Oracle is a medium-sized database, and the scale of things that we deal with is huge. And that experience is unsurpassed, in kernel development. That's what we focus on. We focus on large-scale, enterprise, secure performance.
Interesting. So this Linux sort of core competency, this sort of experience came actually from the early database work.
Absolutely. And it's all come from that. I mean, all of our file system work has been on getting the fastest I/O for the database. All of our network work, we did a lot of work with NFS, for example. Chuck Lever and his team have done amazing stuff with NFS, is to get the best possible network performance to shared nodes. There is memory management and kernel scheduling stuff that we've been doing, focused again on historically database or real application clusters, now on Exadata, because that machine is our flagship, and that thing has to go as fast as possible. So we've done all the work we need to scale that up, and everybody else reaps the benefit of the sort of scale work and performance work that we've done on that thing.
Right,
so
because
pretty nifty.
Obviously you're doing this development in the community,
absolutely,
in terms of, and things are contributed back because actually, I mean, it's just not like, the engineers are just working within the community.
Absolutely, and we now have one of the large. I think at the moment we have the largest Linux mainline kernel development team we've ever had. I think a couple of hundred developers. And what's interesting at Oracle is that we actually have two separate kernel development teams. We have the mainline kernel development team that works with upstream. They don't actually develop for a specific Oracle product. They develop technology or functionality that Oracle needs in a future product, but they'll do it upstream in mainline with Linux, with maintainers. We have a lot of maintainers at Oracle, for example, so some of that are us. And the mainline team doesn't touch Oracle products. Once it goes into mainline, once it's been merged into the kernel, we have a second sustaining kernel team whose job it is to pull mainline and create our kernels from it. So we are a consumer of our mainline development team, like everybody else is a consumer of the mainline kernel development team. We don't have our kernel developers doing both a product development as well as a sort of upstream development. So that allows to be very forward-thinking in the mainline team. They're working years ahead of the product teams because, of course, we have roadmaps and we have deliverables and we have stability and we get QA and we've got all sorts of things that need to go into a supportable product, and the guys out the front can just start pie in the sky dreaming. There's some amazing projects going on at the moment that separation's worked really well.
Really interesting. Okay. Two different teams. I wasn't aware of that. So what other things, obviously, the Oracle engineers are working within the Linux community, within the open source community. We have other open source, Oracle has other open source products.
We do a lot of work. Yeah, we do a lot of work in virtualization, historically in Xen virtualization, now KVM with the more recent releases of Exadata now gone to KVM. But in particular, I want to call out with QEMU, or the emulator system that runs for both Xen and KVM. One of the big projects that we've been doing in our mainline team is devolving the monolithic QEMU system. So QEMU used to be this one big massive security vulnerability. No, I mean one big massive target, essentially. Well, let's call it a target. And what Oracle and others have been doing is trying to disconnect all of those pieces so that you can replace bits of it or not create bits that you don't need, essentially to try and make it a lot more modular, make the attack surface smaller, make it able to be patched in memory. Of course, we've got K-Splice, which is live in memory patching, and we've extended K-Splice to things like the Xen and KVM hypervisors like QEMU, which we can patch in flight. And by reducing the QEMU big monolithic thing into little pieces, we get to be more targeted around what we K-Splice, so we can fix things on the fly more easily. There's less chance of a patch being stalled or anything, so it gives us more security and stability for that kind of stuff as well. So that's one of the big focuses comes to my head.
Cool. Cool. I've noticed internally, the internal Slack channels, because I'm on some of these open source things, there's a lot more activity recently around GitHub.
Oh, yeah.
And I know because I had some conversations with Wim last year. I always try to interview Wim at every single conference.
Sure, of course.
Wherever we're happy to be co-located. And he's always talking about the desire to sort of have more process around our GitHub releases. Yep. And so what's up with all this new activity there?
Well, I've been one of Oracle's GitHub administrators for a couple of years now, maybe. And I'll shout out to Sergio and Roxana, the three of us, the triumvirate of evil. No, the triumvirate of good. Triumvirate of process. Oracle has been and slowly growing, and I think the curve is very exponential now. We're up at 1,500 developers on GitHub. We're up at almost 300 repos, and that's just in our main organization. We've started pushing more and more stuff open source, like everybody is. I mean, we're not unique, beautiful snowflakes in this regard, right. But we wanted to make sure people are aware that we've got open source. We do open source. We publish open source. Our kernel is up on GitHub, so the UEK is on GitHub. You can track it. And what's nifty about the UEK repo is it's ahead of our releases. So you can see our master branches of our various, major versions before they actually get built and released into the product. So we're ahead of the releases.
So this is not obviously just code over the wall here, and I'll see you later. The actually development gates.
Absolutely, and the big thing now, the OpenJDK team and the Java team have just completed their migration from Mercurial to GitHub. So Project Scala, which was this massive undertaking, and I have so much respect for the folks over in the OpenJDK team that managed this. I know that I had to approve something like 300 people into the organization just as they migrated. A huge undertaking, and the reports you've seen on our Slack as well. The reports from the developers is this has streamlined so much of their approvals, their reviews, their merges, it's early days obviously, but the response has been really positive. And we've got a bunch more of that as well. So
I just want to echo that a little bit because at Sun, I remember the transition that Solaris made to Mercurial. Here we have a case where they left Mercurial and went to Git. I was just so surprised, so impressed, I guess is the better word, about the intelligence of SCM systems. Almost like magic. I mean, you've got hundreds of developers distributed globally, all working 24/7, integrating code. And then you're going to migrate this whole thing to a different SCM system. The attention to detail that the project managers and the engineers did, and just as you mentioned, it was a multi-month project, right?
Yeah, and the OpenJDK team is not only Oracle. I mean, there are lots of contributors to OpenJDK. Right. So this is a collaborative effort. And of course, the OpenJDK feeds the Oracle JDK. So we've got all of our internal source control systems also being fed by this big beast of a thing. So all the moving parts are expansive, and I've been on sort of the periphery of this because as a GitHub administrator, I've been helping and advising where I can. But some of the stuff these folks have developed and done for GitHub has been astonishing. I mean, their processes are amazing.
One of the teams that I like hanging out with and talking to is the people at the labs. It seems to be a very high concentration of smart people, and I noticed that obviously the Graal VM project is sort of their most prominent thing in terms of public exposure.
And it's the one that's taken. It's kind of what Java wants to be when it grows up. I love the idea that Java is evolving, that we can take something as mature and robust and as Java and say there is a new life to you, because now you can talk all the languages, the United Nations of Java pretty much. And the flexibility you get with a polyglot VM is phenomenal. I've seen some. So with that, we've just released, as of last Wednesday, I think it was, Project Verrazano. So Verrazano went on GitHub, so github.com/Verrazano. It's spelled the same way as the bridge in New York.
I'm from New York. I remember.
Yeah. And it's our enterprise container platform. So it sits on top of Kubernetes. It's Kubernetes independent though. So you can put it on, OKE and OCI, or you can put it on, Oracle Engine for Kubernetes, which is our managed Kubernetes service. You can put it on-prem on OLCNE, which is our distribution of Kubernetes. And it sits as an opinionated application management tier. It takes all of the stuff we learned from managing software as a service in OCI, all the monitoring and analytics and alerting and debugging and logging, all of that packaged up with application control with Graal VM. So here we have, this is not just a Java application platform, though that's its initial focus because we're first release. But because we've got Graal, this can very quickly do things like Node.js. It can do Ruby. It can do the R stuff. It can do all of the truffle languages. So you start with Java because it's easy pickings, but then you say, but what else have you got in your organization? Let's put it all on Verrazano. And you get all of the same analytics, all of the same logging, all of the same reporting. It is phenomenal. The potential is amazing.
So I've noticed in a few times where basically what you're saying is a lot of these teams are leveraging each other. And there's a lot, it seems to be, and I could be wrong, but I mean, it seems to be less stovepiping here, or at least it seems to be the emergence of more teams that are actually leveraging each other's stuff.
Yeah, maybe the silos have holes. The mice have eaten through the silos. Well, I think it's been Oracle Cloud. I think that has almost forced, in a good way, the teams to work together. I mean, we are our own biggest customers, if you like. The Oracle Cloud is the largest install base of Oracle Linux in the world. It is the largest install base of database, of WebLogic, of all of our products, because we host it for millions of customers. And one thing that I always remind customers, and kind of blows my mind as well as their mind, is that there is only one version of Oracle Linux. The Oracle Linux we run our cloud on is the same Oracle Linux we run the Exadators with. It's the same Oracle Linux that you can put in VirtualBox on your laptop. We don't any changes. The hardware might change underneath. If you can afford what we're doing in OCI, go for it. But the software and the operating system is all the same. You can replicate everything that's sitting in Oracle Cloud in your data center. Now you can do it with dedicated region. You will bring your Oracle Cloud to you, which is phenomenal. But it's one Oracle Linux. The guy and everything that Oracle Cloud needs, we're putting into the same product that our customers get. So if you imagine, I spoke about scale and performance and security. That is what Larry is betting the farm on with Gen 2 Cloud. So you're getting it because Oracle Cloud wants it, and Oracle Cloud needs it from everybody. So it has created this community of interdependent teams where the Oracle Linux team and the hardware team and the cloud team and the WebLogic team and the database team all work together so that everything becomes faster and everything just packages out. And it's been really fun to watch.
Wow.
Yeah.
It is interesting listening to you because you get this impression that there's just so much going on. I can't even it's like I was trying to keep track of, okay, have we not talked about this? Have we talked about this? We talked about this. Have we not talked about that? So I guess that leads into another issue that I always wanted to talk about. I always wanted to ask people, especially now in these interesting times. How has development changed in 2020? And here's my perspective on this. When I first got involved in open source, it was at Sun. I was in marketing, and that's when I first discovered what this thing was. And that was 2000, so that was 20 years ago. And I realized right away that the early Linux work was obviously distributed, and back then there weren't a lot of conferences like there are now.
Sure.
Well, actually, there were up until 2019. So the last, say, 5, 8, 10 years, it's just been quite frankly insane with the number of conferences. There are people that only travel to conferences. It's like a Deadhead concert tour, right? I mean, they just that's all they do. And I would go to a certain percentage of these myself to do my own work. And I would strike up conversations, and I would talk to developers, and I would ask them, what is the influence of these conferences? What is the benefit? And they would always be sort of hacking in the corner with their laptops or something, or they'd be on the beach or in a bar or something after sessions. And they always said to me that we get our ideas here, we get It's great to be, co-located in a high resolution environment where you can get 10, 15, 20 people stuffed in a room for 2-3 hours, just hacking away on ideas. Right.
And it's the few places where for some of the conferences anyway, the vendors are not involved. The developers are there, but the vendors are not there. So it's where we get to talk with our colleagues at our competing companies without the big, oh, you shouldn't be talking to them, they are the enemy. We've never, down in the ranks and file, we don't think that way necessarily. I think what's interesting about conferences has always been what we refer to as the hallway track. It's when you sit outside one of the rooms and you're on a beanbag and you're basically road mapping. You're basically going, should I do this? Should I not do this? Why shouldn't I do this? Who should do this? Where should we do this? It's the validation to your ideas. It's where you bounce things. It's where you go, am I crazy or is this brilliant? It's those sorts of moments that have come out of, particularly for me in conferences. I don't know that a lot of development will happen at a conference. Certainly it does, but I think the best thing about the conference is the fact that you get so many, as you said earlier, disparate people from various locations, from various companies with a different focus, and we all bring some of our own experience to go, have you considered this factor? Have you considered this from a hardware perspective from one of the Intel guys? Have you considered this, a database thing from one of the Oracle guys? Because, that's where we come from. Have you considered a virtualization topic from the VMware guys? And nowadays it's a container topic from Google or Amazon. And those things, those factors all lead to what becomes a better idea or a fuller concept or a bolder plan, I suppose. I don't know. Certainly at the beginning of all this, there was a worry that this would now be lost. With everything being cancelled, there would be a worry that we don't get to meet. But we've got this.
Right.
And, reports out of, I'll shout out to, acquaintances and friends and colleagues that I know who've just run PyCon the last weekend. And the feedback on PyCon is it was as good as, being there in person. The organizers did it so well at ensuring that folks were in sessions but also out of sessions, where there were green rooms and there were chat rooms and there were all of these things to engage like you would at a normal conference. We are a resilient species and we will find, from Jurassic Park, we will find a way. If we can't meet in person, we'll meet on video conferencing and we'll do what it takes.
So you don't think that development itself will be harmed? It'll be, because there are two distinctions.
Yes.
So I understand the distinction you just explained in terms of development versus actually meeting live and getting ideas generated. I was always interested in, if you remove or substantially change the idea section of that, how that will influence the development later.
I don't think it'll be harmed. I think it will change naturally. Everything is going to be changing naturally. I think though over the last couple of years, certainly a lot of the focus development has been very enterprise vendor specific. We at Oracle have developed stuff that we needed and it's gone, through the process, but into the kernel. But our focus has been on what we wanted for our products or our cloud or whatever. And all of the other vendors have the same sort of focus. Individual developers might have different focuses. The idea of the conference and that discussion means that we get to smooth and hone our ideas, but I'm not finding a brand new idea necessarily from a conference, certainly not in the last couple of years. I'm bringing something that my product teams have asked for. I'm bringing something that my hardware teams have asked for or have developed on a chip, they said, hey, we've, when the Spark folks created the DAX on the latest, the Spark chip that we did, we have to write code for this thing. We have to get code into the DAX. So all these kernel developers are going, hey, we can put bunches of Linux code in the silicon. And I remember Larry talking about software and silicon. And so all of these things came from stuff that we're doing and then get built into bigger things from interactions with other folks. So I think it will change, but I don't think anything's going to harm this. We're too big. We're too determined. I think that there will be a new normal. And we will adapt to it.
Yeah, well, it's going to be interesting to see. It's going to be interesting to see. I definitely, I keep on asking the question because I want to learn it myself, and because we're all sort of in it together. And one of the points you brought up earlier is that actually one of the reactions I had earlier is that there's so much going on, and there's so many projects and products and people distributed all over the place. It can get kind of messy and how to follow it all. And one of the things I noticed last year, I guess it's about a year ago now, maybe 6 months ago, is a new website came out, opensource.oracle.com.
Yes.
And it was very nice because it basically provides an interface, a search interface for the projects that are on GitHub. And the interface is very nice, and it must have been designed by an engineer because the interface is very clean, simple.
It's our new red. So Oracle's new Redwood theme is the focus of that. It is written in Apex, which is Oracle's Application Express visual development environment. Shout out to Sergio and his team for that development. It's a window, if you like. Opensource.oracle.com is a window into all of our GitHub content, because one of the things that Oracle is not is small. So we have, github.com/Oracle, but we also have github.com/Verrazano. We've got github.com/MySQL, github.com/ a bunch of things. So we use the opensource.oracle.com portal as a window to all of the stuff that we're doing on GitHub that you may not even have known has been stewarded by Oracle, the GraalVM stuff we mentioned earlier as well, and other things that we acquire along the way. And one of the things that we've been doing, particularly with our cloud investments, is we've now got content and experience products. We've got marketing products. We've got big data products. We've got some of the analytics in our data sciences divisions are fascinating, and they're all out there as well. So it's quite the array of options. It's amazing.
It sounds like there's a lot of opportunity. It sounds like if you're a developer and you're in college or even in high school these days, there's a lot of opportunity in the open source world, and that could very actually land you a job at one of these companies, including Oracle, because you can interface right with the people who are working on the projects. Who are in the company.
You get seen, and one of the beauties of open source is that you can see the work as it happens. If you are just starting out, you can read and you can learn. And I will stress, because I'm not actually a developer, I'm a product manager. I tell my team that I'm the ideas guy and they're the brains. That I can go and I can do the other things that folks don't like. I can write documentation. I am a mean technical writer. So for a lot of our smaller repos, I'll go in and rewrite developer documentation into usable user documentation. And those are sort of things, if you're wondering what you can do to contribute, you don't have to be a developer. If you're an artist, maybe create a logo. If you're a writer, do some documentation. If you're a user, you can be a tester. If you know the software and you use it, you can then test new features and provide feedback. That stuff is invaluable. And it's the kind of thing that open source products by their nature can't afford. If you're just starting your open source project, you can't afford testers and documentation writers and designers. So getting that from the community would be a huge boost to the project that you love. So consider that as well.
You mentioned testing. It's actually kind of interesting because I remember when we were designing our new website for Open Solaris, I did a lot of testing of that. And because I was pretty stupid and ignorant, and I would break things, but I broke things in a way that actually revealed bugs. Because I was a user and the developers were writing this stuff, and I was behaving in a certain way that they might not have wanted. And I found things, and it was really kind of cool because, that's really cool. You found something that we need to fix, So testing really is valuable.
And then actually you lead to one of the focus areas for some of our development teams is fuzzing. So there's a great 3-part blog post on the Oracle Linux blog. So blogs.oracle.com/Linux from our K-Splice team around fuzzing the interface between kernel and user space, which is predominantly regime code. And how do you fuzz that? How do you attack it with unknown bits so you can see if there are vulnerabilities? And it's a amazingly technical, amazingly deep dive into one of the sort of more modern methods that we use to do testing of a code base that's millions of lines. The kernel, I think it was 30 million, 40 million lines or something of code. It's that's probably off by an exponential amount or something. And it's amazing to see some of that in a way that is consumable. I'm not a kernel developer, but I read that and I said, I get this. I can understand these concepts. I get why this is cool. I get why it's difficult, and I get why this is an elegant way to solve it. So that was pretty nifty. And
excellent.
Yeah, and one of the things about testing is probably the one thing that Oracle does, not only because we use it, but we've calculated this. We do about 140,000 hours of QA a day. So that is combined QA of all the Oracle products on Oracle Linux. We do roughly 140,000 hours per day.
Wow. And
we still think we have the largest Linux test farm in the world. So if you think you have a larger Linux test farm than we do, as long as it's in 6-7 figures, you might have a chance at beating us. It's a huge focus for us. It's stability and Oracle customers don't like to upgrade. Like I've got customers that are still sitting on 8i on Linux 3 and stuff. So when they do upgrade, we have to ensure that is as seamless a process as possible as we can make it. And because our customers are so broad, the potential for any configuration is out there. So QA is seriously important for us.
Beautiful. Really interesting stuff. Before we go, I noticed there's a really cool car in the background there that I wanted to
spotted
ask
my
you about.
Bugatti.
Yeah, a Bugatti, really? Okay. And then there's a building behind there, and I see meticulous detail in that building and in the car. So tell me about that stuff.
That is a small obsession I have with Lego. So the Bugatti, that's a Bugatti Chiron. I'm going to pronounce it wrong. That's a Lego Technic, so that's about 3,000 pieces all up.
Wow.
Next to it, that's the new one that came out a couple of months ago. That's the SNES, so the Super Nintendo system for the 30th, 25th anniversary of Super Nintendo. It actually plays Super Mario Brothers, so you can animate it, and Mario jumps through it, and there's a Mario up there that plays the music and the whole thing. The second row, the bottom row, is the modular village. So Lego have been releasing a building a year or a couple of buildings a year for I'm going to say 10 years now. That's only about 7 years worth of buildings. I've got more. There's more. You can't see it because the camera's off it, but there's a grand piano that actually plays music over there. I've got Hogwarts, and I've got tree houses and the Disney castle and a haunted house, and I'm about to start building it. Arrived today. From Harry Potter. So it's a meter long, 6 buildings, the set of Diagon Alley. So that's what's keeping me sane in lockdown is Lego.
Yeah. But it also gives this is how you think. I mean, it's just a lot of meticulous detail involved.
And it is the sense of accomplishment like you get from these things are intricate, and there's a sense of awe at the designer's ability to turn little plastic bricks into some of the most beautiful things you will see. Right. And then you can do it too. You can follow the pictures and do it too, and you build these things and you can go, I made this. And I highly recommend it.
Beautiful. Avi Miller from Melbourne, Australia. Thanks a lot. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you for having me.